Hello, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're at. My name is Joseph, your online instructor for Intro to Philosophy. I'm very excited about the course. I thought I would post up a few online video lectures. I think it's more exciting interface. You get to see me a little bit and hear me, and I think that's a way to enrich the course. I just want to say the PDF of the textbook is up on Loop, and so everybody should have access to that. What I want to do here in this video, just for 2 or 3 minutes, so I don't want to take up very much, too much of your time, is that I want to give a kind of summary of the first chapter on knowledge of the book, the textbook by Simon Blackburn. And so I'll do that. This will be in lieu of a bullet point PDF lecture, which some weeks I may have. So let me just jump into the material. The first chapter is on knowledge, and it's basically an extended meditation, pun intended, on Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641. Philosophers after him have considered universally, the consensus is that Descartes is the father of modern philosophy. If you perform a genealogy, say a big family tree, and you want to go back to the origin, the source of modern philosophy, that would be Descartes. He is the beginning of the beginnings. He's not the beginning of philosophy. Western philosophy goes back to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Of course, there's philosophy before them, and there's philosophy in the East as well that's very interesting that we won't have time to cover. But we'll be focusing more or less on modern philosophy, which is essentially the study of the mind. What is the mind? How does it function as an organ? How does it organize data into an experience for us? So let me just highlight the chapter's basic argument very quickly. Now you need to read the material yourself. You could also read, if you want, I could find for you a PDF. You also need to read, or it'd be a good idea to read, the Meditations on First Philosophy, the first 2 meditations, which would be maybe 30 pages. The whole meditation is only 80 pages, relatively short. Okay, so the first chapter on knowledge talks about basically what Descartes talks about in the first 2 meditations. He says, imagine this. Now, philosophy uses thought experiments all the time. Some of them are crazy, but that's the point. They're trying to be innovative and inventive to get you thinking through about the mind and how we experience the world. So Descartes says, look, if we're honest, our sense data, our sense impressions of the world around us is not all that accurate. How many times do you hear something, you go like this, and you're like, oh, I thought it was something else, but it was just a bird? Or how often are you walking late at night and you hear a bush rustling, and you're like, oh, that's an animal trying to get me or another person trying to get me, and you look over and it's just the wind. So those are basic examples of how sense impressions can deceive us often. Now, Descartes takes that to a hyperbolic level, and he says, imagine that there's an evil genie or demon, just imagine for the sake of argument, okay, that tricks you into thinking that your sense data is reliable when in reality it's not, that it deceives you all the time, okay, and that you cannot imagine that anything actually exists because the evil genius is just making you think it does. Isn't that crazy? Well, and how do we know anything exists at all? Descartes says, how do we know that the coats and the hats that we see walking across the window in front of us, we're looking outside, we see people walking out there, how do we know those aren't just automatons? How do we know, sorry about the moving, how do we know that those are not just wood sticks or machines? How do we know they're real people without running out there and lifting up the hood and tearing off the jacket, right? So we take for granted what our sense data gives us all the time without really interrogating it. And then Descartes says, actually, we could be deceived left, right, and center by our sense data. So that should throw up before us this terrible and frightening idea that we cannot rely on anything around us, that we're often, if not always, deceived by our sense data. So Descartes says in the second and third meditations, he's going to find there's one point that cannot be deceived about our experience in the world. Can you think of it? Okay, can you think of it? What is the one thing The one experience that never will fail to give you reliable information. Descartes says, I close my ears, I stop up my eyes, right? I close off the world, and then I find it, right? So philosophy does not rely on sacred texts or a God who reveals himself in sacred texts. So philosophy does not is different than theology, although very similar. Different than theology in that it doesn't believe in or profess faith in a kind of divine revelation. So Descartes is not saying that it's somehow God that is reliable, although he does believe in God. He, in fact, turns knowledge in on the human and says, what is it about us, okay, that is what he calls indubitable or sure? What is a sure foundation? And what is the one thing the evil genius, the evil demon cannot deceive me about? He says, I doubt everything. I doubt all my sense impressions, and the evil demon has given me good reason to doubt them all. But what is the one thing I cannot doubt? Okay, it's so simple, it's elegant. It's so elegant, it's genius. He says, the one thing I cannot doubt is the fact that I'm doubting. The fact that I'm thinking about doubting. And he says, the one thing I cannot doubt is my thinking. So the only thing that is reliable is the fact that I think. Hence his very, very famous statements, and you all know it. You can all say it. 1, 2, 3, do it. I think, therefore I am. Meaning my existence depends. The only thing that's sure about me is not sense data, but the fact that I can think and doubt about it. And the fact that doubting is itself a form of thinking, okay, it is therefore thinking itself that guarantees or establishes that I exist. So that is the kind of legendary elegance of Descartes' argument and meditations on first philosophy. He then begins to go on and talk about the difference between the soul and the body, or the mind and the body, which is a fascinating dualism that philosophers still are grappling with, that the mind is a thinking thing, and it's a totally different substance than the body, which is an extended thing or a spatial thing. Res extensa, res means thing, extended, extensa means extended, so that's the body. Res cogitans, res is thing, cogitans, to cogitate is to think. So res cogitans is the mind. So they're two different types of things. They don't overlap, they run parallel to each other, which is fascinating. Then how does sense data actually enter into the mind if it's entering into the body first, which is a totally different kind or type of thing than the mind itself? So this hard mind-body dualism has its roots in Descartes as well. I think that's probably enough. There's a lot of detailed material in the first chapter, but most of it revolves around doubting and how do I know myself and how can I think and what is thinking. And so read the material and it will go through Descartes a bit more carefully, although not that much more carefully. It's a kind of highlight reel of the best of Descartes, and so it skips a lot in Descartes too. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll have an announcement soon for week 1. Thanks.